what is AIRA, what is AIRA about, and all of that. The African Internet Rights Alliance, AIRA, is made up of 9 civil society organizations that are based in countries in Central Africa, East, Southern, and West Africa. And you can see on the screen the the organizations that made up AIRA. You have Co-Creation Hub from Nigeria, Amnesty International, Kictanet, CPIT, Paradigm Initiative, Article 19, Budget, Legal Resource Center, and CPESA, 9 civil society organizations based in different locations in Africa. We are the pioneer members of AIRA, and just for the sake of for people who are not familiar with some of these organizations, for some of the organizations I mentioned earlier, most of these organizations are organizations working on civic tech, working on digital rights across the continent. What is the vision of AIRA? AIRA envisions an Africa where digital rights are upheld in all aspects of life, governance, and the economy, ensuring equity and prosperity across the continent. And our mission is to undertake collective interventions and execute strategic initiatives to promote privacy and data protection, affordability and access to the internet, access to information, and freedom of assembly, expression, and the press. So why AIRA? I mean, why do we need AIRA? Why is AIRA important? After all, we have these organizations already working on this issue. So this is the background. Each month, more than 500 million Africans access the internet. That is more than all the internet users in North America and the Middle East combined, and that number continues to grow. That is interesting, right? Now, there are some challenges. As the internet and digital technology become more and more integrated into aspects of life, governance, and the economy in Africa, the challenge is that there are also inequalities, and the challenges that are faced online gets reflected offline. So what our unique response, therefore, are rooted in 4 key values, which are accountability, transparency, integrity, and good governance. Using this value as a guide, AIRA undertakes collective interventions and executes strategic campaigns that engage the government, private sector, media, and civil society to institute and safeguard digital rights. So recently we released a guide, a top
Hi everyone, I apologize. I think Boye's internet connection has frozen a little bit. So I will, Boye, I can see you're back. Okay. Sorry, you're mute.
I'm sorry about that. This also explains why AIRA is very important. The work we do on the continent is important. My connection was, I lost my connection for about a minute there. And I guess it also helps to explain why AIRA is important. It's one of the issues that we are also focusing on, the issue of access. Can you just see my screen, or I need to share it again?
Boy, I can just share it again. We can't see it.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So before I went off the call, I was talking about 10 fundamental terms that we have identified for journalists covering internet rights. If you could help me, please kindly share the link to this guide on the chat room. But some of them you can see on the screen. Number 1 is access to information online. The freedom or ability to identify, obtain, and make use of data or information effectively. And just for me to just, for the sake of emphasis, these terms are terms that we identified could help any journalist that wants to cover the subject of digital rights. These are very key terms that can really get you on a very good start. So we encourage that you get familiarized with these terms for those who are not already familiar with them. So access to information online, freedom of expression online, which is the right to express oneself online and to access information, the opinions and expression of others. So in order if you want to join us in the movement to establish, advance, and protect digital rights for all on the African internet, you can learn more by visiting our website, www.aira.africa. On Twitter, you can find us on AIRA_Africa. On Facebook, we are Africa Internet Rights Alliance. And on LinkedIn, you'll find us the same thing as Facebook, Africa Internet Rights Alliance. Thank you for listening to the presentation. Right now, I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can go into the other part of the session. Thank you very much. So just permit me to talk more about the top 10 fundamental terms for journalists covering internet rights, which I just referenced in the presentation now. It was released last month as a resources for journalists, as I mentioned earlier. This resource shared definition and context on 10 commonly used in the digital and internet rights field, with the intention of helping journalists better understand the jargon that we use. It's for us, it's very important to make sure that we break down some of the jargons that some of us that work in this space we use in communicating with one another, so that it's easy for journalists to interpret and also make it easy for the larger audience to relate it. So we believe that if you have the opportunity to access the resource, it's going to help this understanding. It's also going to make reporting around digital rights a lot better. I believe that by now the link should be in the in the chat box. You can please click on the link, save the link, and go through this guide. It's going to really help the understanding of some of these terms. The results also covers a range of terms from network destruction to disruptions to intermediary liability, including two that were particularly relevant to our discussion today. These are access to information and freedom of expression online. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this presentation, about the guide. I believe that by now we have access to the document or to the link to the document, and I hope that after now we're going to spend some time to look at it and get familiarize ourselves with those terms. I want us to move straight to the next part of the conversation because of time. I'm also very wary of time, which is our panel conversation. At this point, I will ask our panelists to please turn on their videos so that people can see your faces. So I'll try to introduce them one after the other. I'll start from CG. CG is one of us. she's an AIRA member, and she's a fellow. She's from Article 19 East Africa. She's a digital policy consultant at Article 19. Article 19 is the leading NGO defending and promoting freedom of expression across 14 Eastern African countries. I was going to ask you to wave, but she already did. But you can wave again for people who probably missed your first wave. Thank you, CG. Our second panelist is Michael Kayata, Acting Executive Director at Center for Human Rights and Rehabilitation, one of the leading human rights non-governmental organizations in Malawi. Michael is an avid human rights advocate with more than 10 years of experience in managing governance and human rights related projects. Michael, can you please wave so that people can see you and Yeah, that's Michael. I'm sure we can all see Michael on our screen now. And our third panelist is also a very good friend of the house, Richard Winfield. He's head of legal at Global Partners Digital, where he provides legal and policy advice at GPD and to its partner organization on human rights as they relate to the internet and digital policy, and develop legal analysis, policy briefings, and other resources for stakeholders. Uh, uh, Richard has at one time or the other has worked with many of the organizations that are members of AIRA today, and we are pleased to have him join us in this conversation. Richard, can you please wait so that people can see and recognize you? Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. So I guess this is the time to dive into the conversation, and I've actually listed a number of questions that we are going to be, discussing. But I would also say that, irrespective of my prepared questions, that we are also going to try as much as possible to make the conversation flow naturally. So it will be okay to have follow-up questions to some of the responses we'll be getting from our panelists. Since you are, you are the you are you are one of us. So I'm going to start from you to get your perspective on some of the questions that we have identified. I hope that's okay.
Yes, it's okay, boy.
Okay, all right. So once you answer this question, I will also want each of the panelists I also want each of the other panelists to also answer after CG. It's supposed to be a general question, and the question is very simple. Why digital rights? I mean, what attracts you to this issue over, in conjunction with other issues on the continent? Why are you working on digital rights? Why do you think digital rights is an important issue to work on amongst all of the issues besieging Africa that we should be worried about? CG, you have the floor.
Thank you, Boye, and thank you for that very flattering introduction. And I'm really looking forward to a fantastic conversation with the rest of your panelists. So why digital rights? I think, at 19's digital thematic area recognizes that human rights must be protected both on online and offline platforms. And this mantra has essentially, it has been affirmed and reaffirmed in recent years across, by both state actors, but also across the mechanism level. We continue to advocate for digital rights because of their ability to enable and to facilitate other human rights, including the ability, as you mentioned earlier, to express yourself online, to access information online, to exercise your right to freedom of assembly and association online. And we've seen this being evidenced across the globe, by citizens choosing to exercise their autonomous choices, and also exercising their rights online by, for example, protesting on online platforms. And we've seen this in countries like Nigeria, we've seen this in countries like the United States. The second point that I really want to magnify, just to answer your question of why digital rights, is that the internet and digital platforms have essentially offered a very revolutionary lens through which power dynamics between the state and citizens, between private and public actors, and amongst citizens themselves can essentially be balanced. And this has been evidenced by various offline issues being taken onto online platforms, including individuals calling for the redress of corruption issues at the state level, calling for a redress of power imbalances between users and social media platforms through a firmer recognition of their human rights roles and responsibilities, amongst others. I think during the COVID-19 period, very many people have inadvertently been promoting, the digital rights agenda by either calling for heightened internet access at affordable rates, by calling for the enactment of privacy and data protection. And so I think just to sum up what I've stated, digital rights doesn't operate in a lacuna. It is an integral component, not just of the human rights agenda, but also a very integral component of, when you think about, in my perspective, digital rights are almost akin to advocating for what are advocating for air. And I know that might be a bit contentious, but that is that is why digital rights are crucial. That is why digital rights are important. Thank you, Boyan.
Thank you, CG, for your answer. And I'll just quickly move to Michael, especially because of your background working on human rights issue over the years. I know that you have your hands full already. So I just want you to speak more about what attracted you. Why do you think digital rights are important, especially given that you have worked on human rights issues, traditional human rights issue and all of that over the years? Why are you attracted to the subject of digital rights? Please put on your video, please, Mike.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Boy, for that question. For me, I'll speak as Michael, but also as an organization. So personally, I'm interested in digital rights issues. For your information, I come from a journalism background. So I worked as a journalist before I joined the Center for Human Rights and Rehabilitation. And so naturally, digital rights appeal to me. The other thing also is that Malawi is facing so many challenges, especially with regard to digital rights. We have seen in the last few years, attempts, to restrict the, digital rights. There have been laws that have been introduced. People have been arrested, prosecuted. So these are the things that I thought, as an advocate, I need to, stand up and, clearly defend these rights. As an organization, CHRR is a human rights organization. So naturally, issues of digital rights fall within our domain. But we are into this also because of the challenges that are there in Malawi, and also the fact that a majority of Malawians are still excluded, from the digital space. If you look at our statistics, they are very, very depressing. Only 13.8% of Malawians have access to the internet, which is, very, very bad. So we want, to fight, for the space to ensure that more people have access to the internet. But also the fact that the, internet is highly priced in Malawi. If you look at the internet rates, they're very, very high. I think Malawi has one of the highest internet, rates, in Africa, and this has to change. And that's why we are in this advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your response. I'll go to Richard. You have been part of many processes and you have engaged. Okay, yeah, Richard. So, Richard, if you could please turn on your, your video so that people can see you. So the question I was asking you, it's also the same question, but I want you to speak from your perspective in terms of having engaged in a lot of processes globally, and what do you think makes digital rights an important issue for civil society organizations to focus on, and especially for media organizations and journalists to focus on?
Thanks. Well, I would agree certainly with what my two previous panelists have said. What I think is particularly important about the internet and digital technology and about internet rights more broadly is that it actually does touch upon, and in fact is increasingly connected with so many of the other big issues that society is looking at, whether it's gender equality, whether it's the environment, whether it's corruption or electoral processes. In an increasingly digitized world, the extent to which the internet is free, open, secure, and human rights respecting has a huge impact upon all of these other issues as well. We're not going to be able to tackle corruption as an issue globally if our freedom of expression online is restricted and we're not able to share information about when corruption takes place and to raise it. If we're looking towards a digital economy, we're not going to be able to tackle inequalities in the workplace between men and women unless men and women have equal access to those technologies and have the same skills to be able to work in a digital economy. So my view, I think, is that the internet and digital rights shouldn't be seen always necessarily as a completely separate issue, one that is just for a few sort of geeks and tech wizards to be worrying about, but actually a free, open and secure and human rights respecting internet is important to be able to address almost all of the huge challenges and difficulties that we face in the world, whether in Africa or in other parts. And so I think that's why it's important that we don't just talk to ourselves, but we also speak to these other groups and communities and make them aware of how the internet is and technology is a huge part of their mission as well.
Thanks for your response, Richard. Before I come back to you, let me just touch base with CG. Which CG, I want you to look at the continent, the African continent, and can you share with us what you have observed as a trend on, digital rights trend that you have seen? What have you observed? What have you seen as the maybe a common denominator that you have seen across different regions on the continent? As you are aware that as much as the outside world sometimes think Africa is just a country, Africa too has its own differences and all of that. So but what have you seen as a common trend across different regions of Africa, whether you're looking at the west, the south, the east, and the Central Africa? What have been the common trend in terms of digital rights on the continent?
Thank you very much, Boye. And I really like the fact that you pointed out that contextualization is crucial, and it is. We, and by we I mean AFCO 19, works across 14 Eastern African countries, and we approach our digital rights work in all of those countries from a very contextualized perspective. And so, just to sum up and to magnify the points that you noted about, what kind of positive and negative trends are we observing across the continent. I'll just begin with, apologies for that. I'll begin with some positive trends and note that, because I feel like countries have made significant strides in this particular arena. On the positive front, I think that a lot of countries have recognized, or rather a lot of individuals have recognized that in order to exercise your right to access information and your right to express yourself freely on online platforms, that you must be connected. Now, positively, a lot of countries have taken steps to expand and to upgrade their ICT, the national ICT infrastructure. We have also observed the formation of numerous partnerships between states and private actors, and this has led to the deployment of what I like to call innovative connectivity solutions across the continent. So, for example, Google's Loon partnered with the Kenyan government and deployed those balloons that were used to expand connectivity in unserved and underserved areas. We've seen the deployment of humanoid robots in Rwanda. We've seen Rwanda partnering with its telecommunications operators and encouraged network upgrades, amongst others. I think on the challenge front, on the negative trends front, just going back to this issue of access and affordability, it still continues to be a problem for numerous countries. One of the core problems that we have observed is the use of legislation and the use of regulation to criminalize free speech and to restrict individuals' abilities to access information on online platforms. Across the continent, numerous countries have been enacting regulations promoting the registration of either online media users, bloggers, of journalists, amongst others, in countries like Uganda, in countries like Tanzania, in countries like Benin, some of which are actually scheduled to hold their elections, if not in 2020, then in 2021, up until 2024. And so these are some of the top level positive and negative trends. I would go on to the issue of the issue of heightened surveillance and the impact that this has had on encryption and on encryption rights. But I think I will hand over this mantle to my other panelists. Thank you, Boye.
Yeah, thanks for your response, Sigi. You touched on quite a number of issues, but there is one that I really want to emphasize on and bring Richard on the spot to kind of help even provide some additional perspective to. I'll come back to you, Michael, to ask you about COVID-19, about upcoming elections in Malawi and Tanzania. But before I do that, I want Richard to touch on one of the issues that CG had mentioned around collaboration between the big tech and some African governments. So the reality on the continent is that access is a big issue. Internet access is a very big issue on the continent. A lot of, almost half of the population are still not connected, and because of that, a lot of African governments are relying on offers they are receiving from global tech like Facebook and Google for provision of internet services and all of that. So the question I'm asking you, Richard, from where you stand and from the work you have done around the world, what are the risks that you see in this partnership with tech companies trying to, come in to fill a gap regarding internet access on the continent? Bearing in mind that, like people say that half bread is better than none, and bearing in mind the whole argument around net neutrality, around giving all of the internet to all of the people, and not some of the internet to to some people. So what are your views? What are the risks? What are the digital rights perspectives to this kind of collaboration?
That's a really great question, and it's entirely understandable why governments in Africa or in other parts of the world might look to alternative providers of the internet to try and reduce the amount of money that comes from public funds. And so, not just big tech companies in the US, but we've also seen, Chinese investment as well in parts of Africa in terms of infrastructure around telecommunications and so forth. So it does raise challenge. I want to sort of look at your question specifically around big tech companies, because I think the challenge that emerges is not that these companies are coming in and essentially providing internet access, which is equivalent to everybody else in the world that receives the internet. But as you point out, they very much control what the internet looks like for those individuals that they provide it for. And you've pointed to, zero rating initiatives where you have an access only to a limited number of sites, or where you're only allowed onto that provider's websites. And that creates a very distorted version of the internet for those individuals who are able to access it. And yes, there are some positives. They have some access, which is more than they would have otherwise had, but it's heavily controlled. And whether it's a government controlling your internet access or a private platform controlling your internet access, it's a similar problem, because it should be free and open, and you should be able to access the content on an equal basis to anyone else. And what the concern, I think, is that it gives a very distorted picture to individuals who perhaps see Facebook as the internet, or who see a particular platform or specifically a social media website as the internet. And in a way that gives them a very distorted picture. It's like saying, well, we're going to give you access to the television, but you can only watch one channel. And that's not really the same as having full access to the information that a person needs to be able to get the benefits of it. And we also know, particularly looking at Facebook, Google, some of these other big platforms, there are serious concerns around their policies about what they show and what they don't show on their platforms, about the algorithms that they use to promote or to hide certain types of information. And there's very little transparency or accountability about that, something which I know Article 19, has talked about a lot, which is a hugely important issue. So I don't want to sort of give the impression that there's nothing good at all in trying to increase the level of access that people have, but it does come with real questions. And at the moment, I don't think we've got satisfactory answers from the companies who are offering that access.
Thank you, Richard, for your response. I think it's quite broad enough, and I think it helps understand the issues and provide perspective to the issue, to be able to see the other side of the coin that probably the big tech will not put on our faces. So I'm going to move totally away from that to allow Michael to speak to some concerns that that are developing regarding upcoming elections on the continent, and COVID-19 concerns are as well. So interestingly, a lot of a few African countries are totally disregarded, COVID-19 and the scale and all of that. So it's interesting, but key African countries on the continent, East African countries, Malawi, Tanzania will be going into elections very soon. So the question to you, Michael, is how do you think COVID-19 has impacted or would affect ability of people to access information online, freedom of expression online, even as we prepare for election, and when we absolutely need to have access to information around election period and election issues? What are the issues that you see within that whole context?
Thank you very much, Boy. So just to clarify that Malawi will not be holding elections. We have just had an election. So in June, on 23rd June, we had a fresh presidential election.
I meant to say Burundi, not Malawi.
Okay. Okay, so just also to give a bit of a background, so the elections that were held in June in Malawi were actually court-sanctioned elections. So what happened was in May, we held, tripartite elections where we elected president, members of parliament, and the local councillors. However, the outcome of the presidential election was just hugely disputed on the basis that there had been so many irregularities, including, the use of TPEX. This is the correction fluid, on ballot papers, and people question that to say, I think this is an unprofessional. This is an irregularity. So the opposition went to court, and while the opposition were in court, civil society organizations, including my organization, held the protests, sustained protests for months, to actually force the government, to actually, have another election. So to our expectation, the courts actually ruled that the election had been marked by, irregularities, and they sanctioned a fresh presidential election. So the election was actually scheduled for June 23 of this year, and this was a time when Malawi was experiencing an increase in the cases of COVID-19. What our government had done, its response was that they announced a number of measures, which included banning political gathering. Banning all gatherings, including political gatherings, social distancing, etc. Now, people saw that as an attempt by the government to delay the election. So that created some kind of confusion, and also the opposition. Added fuel the confusion, because in their meetings they were accusing the government of trying to avoid the election. So what happened was that we saw a scenario where opposition political parties were holding meetings as if there's no COVID-19, and soon afterwards the ruling party was doing the same. They were holding meetings. So it was, total confusion. You could actually see, meetings being held without any social distancing. You could see people not wearing masks, huge crowds, no social distancing. It created, a lot of confusion. The elections were, held as planned on June 23rd. But what we saw was a decrease in the number of people that went ahead to cast their vote. So, for example, you will see that in May 2019, when we had the tripartite elections, 74 vote turnout was for the 74.4%. But in the last election, in the first presidential election, 64% were the people that actually voted. I believe that this was due to the confusion that was created, but also the fact that some people may have decided not to participate in the elections for fear that they might contract the coronavirus. Just also to mention that by election day, there were about 800 documented cases of COVID-19 and 11 recorded deaths. So possibly that might have scared some people to actually stay away. And the other thing that I also want to highlight is the impact that COVID-19 had on our programs, especially civil society organizations. My organization, for example, we during election time, we deploy our community-based educators to conduct civic education, civic and voter education. But this was not possible because of the coronavirus. Instead, we relied on the mass media. So we had programs on TV, on radio, community radios, and also we posted some messages on our social media platforms. But then you agree with me that the impact was also very small because the access to the internet in Malawi remains a big challenge. As I highlighted earlier on, only 13.8% of our people have access to internet. So this limited the our reach. But also, if you look at the access to radio and TV, not many people have access to these things. In this day and age, you still have people who don't even have a radio set. So these are some of the things I think that undermine our campaign, and it might have contributed also to the lower voter turnout.
Thank you, Michael. We're about to wrap up the conversation, but I want to ask a question before I ask my last question. And this question, anybody on the panel can answer the question. So talking about COVID-19, talking about elections, talking about the trust gap between the government and the people in terms of interpreting measures taken by government regarding COVID-19, whether around election or even around just general life. The question I want to ask is that, what do you consider the impact on digital rights of measures that governments, especially African governments, have taken with respect to COVID-19, the restrictions that have been implemented, the limitation in whether movement, gathering, and all of that? How do you see this playing out post COVID-19, post election, and all of that? How do you see this playing out in the digital rights landscape in different countries in Africa? And also, Richard, in case you want to answer the question, what are the risks, what are the threats that you see that you think we should look out for regarding measures put in place because of COVID-19 post the pandemic years?
I'm happy to share a couple of reflections, perhaps, and then come to my panelists. I think what we've always seen in human history is that during extreme times, emergencies, governments have resorted to developing and introducing new measures which are meant to be exceptional, but then become the norm. And we see that after terrorist attacks, we see that after civil unrest. We're now seeing it during and after the pandemic. And there are two that are causing me particular concern. One is the vast increase in the amount of surveillance that is now taking place, nominally to deal with the pandemic, which of course does need to be managed, but which I fear will become a normal part of society thereafter. So contact tracing apps, which monitor where you are, who you come into contact with, other pieces of personal information, as well as more traditional forms of surveillance, simply monitoring people, taking health checks. I have a concern that these new forms of surveillance will very quickly become a normal part of societal life, even after the pandemic. The second is the efforts that governments are going to restrict the sort of the free flow of information online. We're seeing a lot of disinformation laws being passed or other kinds of legislation being used to silence any criticism of government or how government is dealing with the pandemic, or even legitimate information about the health crisis itself that government finds uncomfortable. And so this I think some governments have used the pandemic as a sort of a justification to introduce more restrictive measures on freedom of expression. And I don't see those measures rolling back anytime, even after the pandemic. So those are two issues that are causing me particular concern.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Yeah, CJ, I was coming to you. Yeah, I definitely want to come to you. So how do you think, I don't know what thoughts you want to share. You can still go ahead and share your thought, but in addition to the thoughts you had in mind, I also want you to speak briefly about what you think digital rights community needs to do in terms of rolling back on some of this measure and ensuring that it doesn't become the norm for African countries. You can go ahead, CJ.
Thank you, Boye. I was just going to add on to what Richard had stated, because I think he's succinctly summarized some of our core concerns in terms of pandemic surveillance, in terms of the use of legislative and regulatory frameworks to criminalize what we're calling criminalizing of speech on online platforms through the use of very broad and very vague provisions. I think just to hammer the point that Richard had mentioned about pandemic surveillance and the lack of sunset clauses in the deployment of a lot of COVID-19 measures that are being taken by governments across the world, has been curiously, in a lot of countries, I think it's very curious to see that the public has in some instances, been generally very receptive and very supportive of some of these, um, you know, concerning measures that are being taken by governments that, you know, we, as Richard pointed out, will definitely have a long-term post-pandemic implication, not just on citizens' abilities to exercise their rights, but also to, you know, just the the breathtaking nature of some of these some of these provisions and measures that are being taken by government are just, you know, they're through the roof. And I think yeah, just to sum up on what, or rather to reinforce what Richard had stated previously, I think one of the other impacts, and this is a positive impact that I really want to magnify, is that on the positive front, I think a lot of individuals, especially those who are able to access online platforms and access digital technologies, that there has been an increase in individuals' empowerment, in individuals' abilities to call for, as Richard noted earlier, for more accountability, to call for more transparency, not just from states, but also from private sector entities, which for me is a very huge impact, and which, you know, consequently contributes towards this, you know, the bridging of this gap between, you know, this trust gap that Boye, you mentioned earlier, between governments and their citizens, and between, you know, amongst and between citizens themselves, and even between citizens and private sector entities. In terms of rolling back some of these initiatives, so, you know, so I think some of the measures that digital rights advocates and proponents can essentially advocate for includes, one, you know, in instances where conversations fail, we have often relied on strategic litigation as one tool of pushing back against some of these regressive either frameworks or measures that are being taken by governments. And we've seen, you know, Kenya is one of the countries where strategic litigation has been used to push back against digital identity drives that have been enacted without adequate and appropriate safety and security measures, pushing back against the possession of regulatory or legislative powers by health ministers. And, you know, some of these litigious measures have been advocated not just by ourselves in our capacity as a digital rights organization and a freedom of expression organization, but also by public interest litigators. And I think that is my core, you know, the message that I want to sum up with, that digital rights protections are not just a responsibility of organizations. It is also a responsibility of the citizens who possess these rights themselves. And so that is where I will stop for today. Thank you.
Thanks, CG, for that incredible answer. We've totally run out of time now. I'm not going to be able to ask a lot of questions again. I just want to ask a final question for everybody. Does not have to answer, but if you feel like answering, please speak on the question. The year is coming to an end, and very soon we'll be saying Happy New Year. 2001 is going to be right before us. 2021 is going to be right before us. So this question is simple. What should we look out for regarding digital rights in 2021, especially in Africa?
Hello, sorry, I've been in and out. I've been experiencing unstable internet. I would want to speak based on the context in Malawi. So we have a new government, and the good thing that I see is that our government has made a commitment to promote access to internet for more Malawians. This was contained in the election manifesto, and already we have seen positive responses. For example, we ran a campaign a few months ago on the internet. What we were trying to do is to encourage the government to intervene to ensure that the internet is affordable. So we ran that campaign together with CIPESA, but also local organizations. And the response from the government has been very good. We have actually seen the new Minister of Information actually holding meetings with the telecommunication companies like TNM, Airtel, and some of them have responded quite well. We have seen a reduction, for example, in data bundles. TNM has done the same. Airtel has been, incredibly generous. They have made, huge, reductions. So that gives us a promise that we might see some changes, especially some improvements, especially with regards to access to internet. We have also been engaging MACRA. So MACRA is the Malawi Communication Regulatory Authority, and they have also been very positive. They are rolling out what they're calling universal access to ensure that more people have access to internet. And with all that, if everything goes to plan, then we should see a good year in 2021. However, we are mindful that coronavirus is still with us. The cases, of course, in Malawi are not increasing at an alarming rate. At least we have actually seen improvements. But then we are also, do not want to be too optimistic. We might just find ourselves in a very precarious situation. So far so good. The year 2021 looks good, but I think we still need to, continue the advocacy, particularly on the access to internet, to make sure that companies remain committed to keeping their rates low, but also keeping the pressure on the government. We have been asking the government, for example, to reduce taxes, because one of the complaints, one of the issues that the companies have raised is that the tax in Malawi on internet is very, very high. So we understand, and that's why we have engaged the government also to reduce the taxes. So in 2021, we'll be looking to see whether our government will act accordingly. But so far, it looks good on our part. I talked about the laws. The laws have not changed. We will see whether we'll see whether there will be changes to those provisions that provide the government that empower the government actually to restrict online communications. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. We've totally run out of time, and unfortunately, I will not be able to get additional thoughts from the other panelists because of time. I want to make sure that we finish exactly on time. I think this is the point where I just say thank you to our panelists for the wonderful perspective that they have shared during this conversation. It's been great talking to you guys, and you guys have given us a lot of great insight that I believe is going to be very useful for everybody on the call and those who are going to watch the recording after now. It's been wonderful talking to you all. And in terms of what to look for, key thing I took from Michael's intervention, the digital tax that seems to be pervading the continent. I think it's something we need to look into. We also need to look into the role that tech companies are playing in recent times. I think that's also something very key that we need to look into. I just also want to reiterate for everybody on the call and those who are going to watch the recording later that you can learn more about AIRA on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and by visiting our website, AIRA.Africa. Have a good day. And once again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, CG. And thank you, Michael. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Boy. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Boy. Bye.
Thanks so much, Boy. Bye-bye.